Mom, are we really going to live here? I don't know, buddy, but this is all we have left. It looks haunted. Dust particles dance in a beam of sunlight, pushing through a boarded-up window. Sarah stood in the middle of 50 years of her grandmother's collected memories, her bank account completely empty and an eviction notice hidden in her purse. She thought she was just cleaning out trash. She was about to discover a fortune. Gravel crunched under the worn-out tires of Sarah Jenkins' 10-year-old station wagon as it slowly crawled up the long, overgrown driveway. Beside her, 8-year-old Leo was asleep, his cheek pressed against a window, holding a worn superhero action figure tightly in his hands. Sarah turned off the engine. The sudden quiet of the Pennsylvania countryside pressed in on her like a heavy weight. Ahead of her stood the O'Connell family farmhouse, an 1864 Victorian structure that looked less like a welcoming home and more like a crumbling monument to a forgotten time. Its white paint had long since given way to a grayish rot. The wraparound porch sagged dangerously on its stone foundation. This falling-apart shell was Sarah's last option. 3 months ago, her life had fallen apart completely. Her ex-husband, Bradley Hughes, had not only walked out on their marriage, but had also hidden his money inside a web of secret companies, leaving Sarah buried under crushing debt. The graphic design agency where she worked let her go just 1 week after the divorce was finalized, with her savings wiped out by lawyer fees and her rent 2 months late. Sarah had nowhere left to go when the eviction notice was taped to her apartment door. Then came the phone call from William Hayes, a lawyer in Willow Creek. Her estranged grandmother, Margaret, known as Peggy O'Connell, had passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 89. Margaret had left everything she owned to Sarah, her only living relative. But salvation rarely comes without a price. The estate had serious problems. There was nearly $40,000 in unpaid property taxes owed to the county. If Sarah could not pay it within 90 days, the farmhouse and its 40 acres of beautiful valley land would be taken away and sold to the highest bidder. Sarah pushed open the heavy wooden front door, fighting against the swollen hinges. A wave of musty air, smelling of dried lavender, damp wood, and decades of untouched dust, washed over her. Margaret had kept to herself in her final years, and the house showed it. Stacks of old newspapers, moth-eaten fabrics, and antique furniture were piled carelessly in every room, creating a maze of forgotten memories. "Mom, it smells weird," Leo muttered, rubbing his eyes as he stepped into the dark entryway. "I know, buddy. It's just old. We're going to fix it up," Sarah said, forcing a cheerful tone she did not feel. Her plan was desperate, but simple. Clear out the clutter, make quick repairs to the surface, and sell the property before the county took it away. It was a race against time. The first week was brutal. Sarah worked from sunrise until midnight, powered by cheap coffee and pure fear. She rented a massive commercial dumpster that swallowed endless trash bags filled with broken lamps, rotting curtains, and ruined clothes. Her hands were covered in blisters. Her back ached with a deep, steady pain. And every time she checked her shrinking bank balance on her phone, a cold sweat broke out across the back of her neck. Adding to her stress was a threatening presence circling the property. On her third day, a sleek black Mercedes crept up the driveway. Out stepped Thomas Harding, a local property developer whose slick back hair and expensive tailored suit looked completely out of place among the rural decay. Harding had been sending Margaret aggressive letters for years, trying to buy the property for far less than it was worth. Now he had turned his greedy tactics toward Sarah. "Miss Jenkins, you have to be realistic," Harding said, standing on the sagging porch, his eyes sweeping over the property with open greed. "This house needs to be torn down. The structure is not safe, and the back taxes are a nightmare. I am offering you $50,000 in cash. It pays off the county, gives you $10,000 to start over, and takes this problem off your hands. The land alone is worth $500,000, Mr. Harding." Sarah shot back, gripping the handle of her push broom. Harding smiled a thin, cold smile, only to someone who has the money to develop it. "You don't. In 80 days, the county takes it, and you get absolutely nothing. Think about your son." His parting words lit a fire inside her. She refused to let Bradley destroy her future, and Thomas Harding steal what little remained. By the end of the second week, Sarah had finally cleared the main sitting room of trash, revealing the original beauty of the 1860s space. The most striking feature was a massive hand-carved mahogany fireplace imported from Europe by her great-great-grandfather, Nathaniel O'Connell. Nathaniel had been a respected merchant and private banker during the Civil War era. He was rumored to have built an enormous fortune that seemed to vanish without a trace during the financial collapse of 1873. As Sarah began stripping away the ugly 1970s floral wallpaper from the wall beside the fireplace, her putty knife caught on something hard. She scraped away a thick layer of plaster and dry glue, revealing a small rectangular groove in the original wood paneling underneath. Frowning, she dug her fingers into the groove and pulled. A small panel, no bigger than a hardcover book, popped loose with a dry crack, sending a shower of ancient dust onto the floorboards. Inside the dark, narrow space sat a single object. Sarah reached in, her heart doing a strange flutter against her ribs. Her fingers closed around something cold and heavy. She pulled it out into the fading afternoon light. It was an antique iron key, easily 6 inches long, with a remarkably complex and uneven bow and a shaft carved with strange geometric patterns. It was impossibly heavy, had no rust at all, and smelled faintly of oil. There were no locks anywhere in the house large enough or old enough to match such a key. Sarah turned it over in her blistered hands, a strange electric chill running up her arms. She did not know it yet, but she had just found the first clue in a trail that had stayed hidden for more than 150 years. The discovery of the iron key changed everything about how the house felt. What had seemed like a depressing chore suddenly felt like a mystery waiting to be solved. Sarah kept the heavy key in the pocket of her denim overalls, its weight a steady, comforting presence against her leg as she continued the exhausting work of stripping the farmhouse down to its bones. Days blended into nights. Sarah began focusing all her energy on the sitting room, drawn by something she could not explain back to the massive mahogany fireplace where the key had been found. The brickwork around the fireplace was detailed and beautiful, featuring hand-painted tiles showing peaceful countryside scenes. But as Sarah scrubbed away decades of soot and ash from inside the firebox, she noticed something that did not make sense. The inside measurements of the fireplace did not match the outside size of the chimney wall. There was a gap of at least 3 feet of space that could not be explained. She tapped the blackened brick with the wooden handle of her trowel. Thud, thud. Then she moved a foot to the left and tapped again. Hollow. A burst of pure adrenaline shot through her body. Leo, she called out, but her son was outside in the overgrown garden, chasing fireflies in the fading light. Sarah grabbed a heavy crowbar from her toolbox. She wedged the steel tip into the mortar line between 2 bricks on the hollow-sounding wall. The mortar, brittle and dry after 160 years, crumbled easily. With a sharp jerk, she pulled a brick free. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah carefully removed a 2-foot square section of the false back wall. Behind it was not an open draft, but a small copper-lined alcove, designed to protect whatever was inside from the heat and smoke of the fire. Inside the alcove rested a thick leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and gray with age, alongside a small velvet pouch. Her hands trembling, Sarah pulled the items free. The pouch held 5 heavy, solid gold coins. Liberty had double eagles, dated 1865. Sarah gasped. Even with her limited knowledge, she knew each of these coins was worth thousands of dollars. It was enough to hold off the county tax collector for at least another month. But it was a journal that held the real secret. She opened it carefully, the brittle pages protesting as she turned them. The elegant, looping handwriting belonged to her great-great-grandfather, Nathaniel O'Connell. It was not a standard accounting book. It was a diary written in desperation. October the 14th, 1873. The entry read, "The banks are failing. Men I trusted are jumping from windows in New York. I have withdrawn the entirety of the firm's liquid assets. The government cannot be trusted, and the Pinkertons are watching the trains. I have brought it all back to Willow Creek. The architect, Miller, has completed the modifications to the house. The hidden spaces are secure. The main vault requires the iron key, hidden where the heart of the home burns. I will wait out this storm, though the shadows grow long." Sarah stared at the page, the words blurring as her mind raced. the entirety of the firm's liquid assets. Nathaniel O'Connell had been a multimillionaire in 1870s money, and he had hidden it all inside this very house. Her realization was violently interrupted by the sharp, terrifying sound of breaking glass. Sarah jumped, dropping the journal onto the floorboards. The sound had come from the kitchen at the back of the house. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. She checked her watch. It was past 10 o'clock at night. Leo was asleep upstairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. Sarah picked up the heavy crowbar and crept out of the sitting room. The hallway was completely dark, the only light coming from a thin slice of moonlight cutting through the dust-covered windows. As she neared the kitchen door, she heard the distinct crunch of heavy boots on the linoleum floor. Someone was inside the house. "Who's there?" Sarah shouted, her voice shaking but loud, desperately hoping to scare the intruder away. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, blinding her for a moment. "I'm armed. I've called the police," she lied, raising the heavy steel bar above her shoulder. The beam of light dropped to the floor, and a dark figure sprinted toward the back door. Sarah heard the screen door slam wildly on its hinges, followed by the frantic crunch of gravel as the intruder ran into the dense woods behind the property. She ran to the kitchen. The back window had been smashed in, glass glittering dangerously across the floor. Sarah did not sleep that night. She sat in a rocking chair at the foot of the stairs, the crowbar resting across her lap, the iron key burning a hole in her pocket. The police arrived the next morning, took a half-hearted report, and blamed it on local teenagers looking for a thrill in the old, abandoned O'Connell place. But Sarah knew better. At noon, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up the driveway again. Thomas Harding stepped out, looking perfect in a tailored navy suit. Sarah marched out to the porch, gripping the railing tightly. "I told you to stay off my property. Harding." Harding held up both hands in a fake gesture of peace. "Miss Jenkins, please. I heard about the break-in on the police scanner. I came to check on you and your boy. It's not safe out here. An isolated house. No security system. Desperate people do desperate things." His eyes were not looking at her. They were scanning the windows, lingering just a fraction too long on the sitting room. "We're fine," Sarah said coldly, "and the house is no longer for sale. I'm paying off the tax lien next week." Harding's smug expression slipped, a flash of real anger across his face. "Is that right? Found a rich uncle?" Or maybe he took a step closer to the porch, dropping his voice to a low, threatening murmur. "Maybe you found something else. This house has a lot of history, Sarah. Dangerous history. Some things are better left buried. Get off my land before I call the sheriff for trespassing," Sarah demanded. Harding stared at her with cold, calculating eyes. "You're playing a game you don't understand, Miss Jenkins. Nathaniel O'Connell owed money to powerful people. That debt didn't die with him." He turned and walked back to his car, then stopped with his hand on the door handle. "I'll be back," and the price just went down. As his car kicked up dust down the driveway, Sarah rushed back inside and locked the deadbolt. Harding was not just a greedy developer. He knew about Nathaniel's hidden fortune. He had probably hired the man who broke in the night before. She ran back to the sitting room, picked up the journal, and flipped frantically through the fragile pages until she found another entry. November the 2nd, 1873. "They are closing in. I have secured the main cache beneath the floorboards of the study, guarded by the mechanism. The iron key is the only release. If the alignment is off, the fail-safe will destroy the contents." Sarah looked at the heavy iron key in her hand, then glanced up at the ceiling. The study was not on the ground floor. It was upstairs, directly across the hall from the room where Leo was currently playing. The race was no longer just against the county tax office. It was a race against Thomas Harding and whoever he was working with. The upstairs study was a stuffy, windowless room that smelled of old leather and trapped summer heat. Sarah stood in the doorway, a heavy flashlight in one hand and Nathaniel O'Connell's fragile journal in the other. Unlike the chaotic clutter in the rest of the farmhouse, this room was remarkably bare. The only furniture was a massive rotting oak desk bolted to floorboards and tall bookshelves that had been emptied out decades ago. The main cache beneath the floorboards of the study, guarded by the mechanism, Sarah set her tools down and walked to the center of the room, her boots echoing hollowly on the wide chestnut-wood floor. She knelt down and ran her bare hands across the wood, feeling for seams, loose nails, or any kind of irregularity. The planks were tightly fitted together and coated in a thick layer of darkened antique shellac. For an hour, she crawled across the dusty floor, tapping the wood with a heavy end or crowbar and listening for any change in sound that might reveal a hidden space. Nothing. The entire floor sounded solid. Frustrated, she wiped a streak of dirty sweat from her forehead. She pulled the iron key from her pocket and traced the strange geometric patterns carved into its heavy shaft. The journal had mentioned an alignment. If the alignment is off, the fail-safe will destroy the contents. Nathaniel had been a man of precision, a banker who trusted numbers and geometry above everything else. Sarah walked over to the heavy oak desk. It was positioned oddly in the room, angled slightly away from the walls rather than sitting straight. She knelt beside one of the massive base legs. A thick crust of dust and grime coated the bottom, but as she chipped it away with her putty knife, a gleam of dull metal caught the beam of her flashlight. Embedded in the floorboard, sitting flush against the front right leg of the desk, was a circular brass plate no larger than a drink coaster. It was tarnished nearly black, but the faint outline of a compass rose was engraved on its surface, surrounded by a ring of tiny Roman numerals. At the very center of the brass compass was a deep, cross-hatch keyhole that perfectly matched the unusual shape of the iron key. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had found it. She carefully inserted the heavy iron key into the slot. It slid in with a smooth, metallic whisper that sent a thrill down her spine, but she did not turn it. The journal's warning echoed in her mind. If the alignment is off, the fail-safe will destroy the contents. She needed to find the correct position before applying any pressure, or she risked setting off whatever trap Nathaniel had built to destroy the treasure. Before she could study the brass plate any further, the frantic barking of a dog outside broke her focus. Sarah rushed to the hallway window and looked through the dirty glass. Her heart sank. A county vehicle was parked next to her station wagon. A tall, heavy-set man in a polo shirt holding a clipboard was walking up the porch steps, flanked by none other than Thomas Harding. Sarah bolted downstairs, her blood boiling. She yanked the front door open just as the county official was raising his fist to knock. "Can I help you?" Sarah demanded, her eyes darting to Harding, who wore a smug, predatory smile. "Sarah Jenkins?" The man asked, holding up a badge. "Greg Peterson, Willow Creek Building and Safety. We received an anonymous complaint regarding the safety and cleanliness of this home. Given that a child is living here, I am required to perform an immediate emergency inspection." "Anonymous complaint?" Sarah glared at Harding. "You gotta be kidding me. I'm simply acting as a concerned citizen and a consultant for the county, Miss Jenkins," Harding said smoothly, stepping onto the porch. "I know this old house. It's a death trap. I just want to make sure your boy doesn't fall through a rotten floorboard. You need a warrant to come inside," Sarah said, blocking the doorway. Peterson looked at her with flat, bureaucratic irritation. "Miss Jenkins, if you refuse entry, I will immediately flag this property as unfit for people to live in. You and your son will have to leave within 4 hours." Cornered, Sarah backed away, her hands balling into fists. For the next 30 minutes, Peterson walked through the lower level of the house, his pen scratching aggressively on his clipboard. He noted the exposed wiring where Sarah had removed the plaster, the sagging porch roof, and the lack of running water in the kitchen due to a burst pipe she had not yet fixed. Harding shadowed him the whole time, pointing out every flaw, his eyes constantly scanning the freshly exposed brick of the fireplace. "This is unacceptable, Miss Jenkins," Peterson finally announced, standing in the entryway. "The clutter is a fire hazard. The electrical wiring is not up to code, and the foundation needs a certified engineer's report. I am issuing a temporary condemnation notice. You have exactly 48 hours to show proof that you have the money to make these repairs, or you must vacate the property." 48 hours? That's impossible, Sarah argued, panic rising in her throat. "The law is the law," Peterson said coldly, handing her a yellow copy of the citation. As Peterson walked back to his truck, Harding lingered in the doorway. 48 hours, Sarah. The county won't care about your historical fireplace, when they bulldoze this place. My offer is still on the table. Take the $50,000. Walk away before you lose everything. I would rather burn it to ground myself and sell it to you, she hissed, slamming the heavy wooden door in his face and throwing the deadbolt. She leaned against the door, her chest heaving. 48 hours. The clock had not just sped up. It had been rigged to explode. She ran upstairs to find Leo sitting on his sleeping bag, coloring quietly, completely unaware of what had just happened below. Sarah kissed the top of his head, her determination hardening into something cold and unbreakable. She grabbed her flashlight and marched back into the study. She dropped to her knees beside the brass plate. She needed the alignment. She opened the journal and scanned Nathaniel's frantic handwriting, flipping past the entries about bank failures and detectives watching the trains, searching for anything related to numbers, dates, or compass directions. Then a single underlined sentence at the bottom of the final page caught her eye. The truth of my legacy faces the dawn of my greatest betrayal. October the 14th. Sarah stared at the brass plate. The outer ring contained Roman numerals. October the 14th. 10/14. She carefully rotated the outer brass ring, which moved with a stiff, gritty resistance until the numeral 10 aligned with the top of the keyhole and the numeral 14 aligned with the bottom. Faces of dawn. East. She rotated the inner compass rose until the letter E pointed directly toward the heavy oak desk. Taking a deep breath and quietly asking for strength from a great-great-grandfather she had never known, Sarah gripped the iron key and turned it clockwise. For one terrifying second, it would not move. Then, with a loud mechanical clack that resonated beneath the floorboards, the key turned a full 90 degrees. Deep within the floor, heavy gears ground together, shrieking against a century of rust. A puff of stale dust shot up from the seams of the floorboards. The grinding stopped, leaving a heavy, expectant silence in the sweltering study. Sarah scrambled backward as a rectangular section of floorboards, a perfectly cut panel measuring 3 feet by 2 feet, located directly between the desk and the wall, suddenly dropped down half an inch with a heavy thud. Her heart pounding in her ears, Sarah wedged her crowbar into the newly formed gap and pried. The panel was shockingly heavy, reinforced with a sheet of rusted iron on its underside. With a groan of effort, she flipped the trapdoor over, letting it crash onto the floor beside her. A blast of cold underground air floated up from the dark rectangular hole, carrying the sharp metallic smell of rust and old paper. She shone her flashlight into the opening. It was not just a hiding spot. It was a custom-built, steel-lined vault sunk deep into the thick beams of the farmhouse. Resting at the bottom was a large, heavy steel lockbox with thick metal rivets, flanked by 4 canvas sacks that had partially rotted away, spilling their contents onto the vault floor. Sarah reached down and gently touched the spilled contents. They were bricks, heavy, dull yellow bricks. She grabbed one and lifted it into the light. It weighed roughly 10 pounds. Its surface was stamped with the seal of the United States Assay Office and the date 1870. Solid gold. A choked sob of pure, overwhelming relief escaped her lips. There were dozens of them. She was holding a fortune, millions of dollars in raw, historical gold. Bradley's debt, the county taxes, Harding's threats, all of it was instantly wiped away. She and Leo were safe. They were more than safe. They were wealthy beyond anything she had ever imagined. But as the initial shock of the gold faded, Sarah's eyes were drawn to the riveted steel lockbox, sitting in the center of the vault. It had no padlock, only a simple latch. She hauled out the opening, her muscles straining against the weight, and set it on the floor. She unfastened the latch and threw the lid open. Inside, protected by layers of oilcloth, lay stacks of neatly written documents, wax-sealed property deeds, and bound legal contracts. Sarah carefully lifted the top bundle. The parchment was crisp, the ink a faded brown. It was a contract dated September the 3rd, 1873, between Nathaniel O'Connell and a man named Elias Harding. Sarah froze. Harding, she read rapidly, her eyes scanning the legal language. It was a partnership agreement for a large railroad expansion project, but attached to it was a series of private letters and bank records. The letters, written by Elias Harding, detailed a complex scheme of theft. Elias had systematically drained money from railroad investors, funneling it into secret accounts in London, and had expertly forged documents to make it appear as though Nathaniel O'Connell was the one who had stolen everything. The final document was a desperate letter from Nathaniel, seemingly written as a last resort, but never sent. Elias Harding has ruined me. The letter read, he has stolen the investor's money and sent detectives to my door. They believe the gold to be the stolen railroad funds. Elias threatened my family if I told the truth. I will bury my wealth, and I will bury the proof of his crimes with it. Let history judge the O'Connells, but let my descendants know the truth. Sarah sat back on her heels, the breath not completely out of her. Thomas Harding was not just a greedy developer. He was Elias Harding's descendant. The fortune he was searching for was not just money. It was the evidence that his entire family legacy, their wealth and their respective reputation in Willow Creek, had been built on a massive, multi-generational lie. If these documents came to light, the Harding family would face historical disgrace and legal action that could strip them of everything. Harding knew, he had to know, that was why he was so desperate to bulldoze the house. He was not trying to find the treasure. He was trying to destroy the evidence before Sarah could find it. As the full weight of this discovery settled over her, the farmhouse plunged into complete darkness. The low hum of the refrigerator downstairs died. The faint buzz of the hallway light bulb went silent. The power had been cut from outside. "Mom," Leo's terrified voice echoed from the hallway. "I'm here, baby," Sarah said softly, keeping her voice incredibly calm as she switched off her flashlight to avoid making herself a target. She moved quickly through the darkness, found Leo at his bedroom door, and pulled him tightly against her. "Listen to me, Leo. We're going to play a quiet game, okay? Not a single sound." Downstairs, the heavy crunch of a boot splintering the front door frame echoed through the silent house. It was not the nervous creeping of a teenager like 2 nights before. This was forceful and violent. Crack, crash. The front door gave way, slamming hard against the entryway wall. Spread out, a deep, unfamiliar voice commanded from the ground floor. "She's here somewhere. Find the journal. Find the key. Tear the walls apart if you have to. What about the woman and the kid?" Another rough voice asked. Mr. Harding said there should not be any witnesses left to challenge the condemnation. The first man replied coldly, "Make it look like a structural collapse. The house is a death trap anyway." Ice flooded Sarah's veins. They were not just there to rob her. They were there to kill her and her son. She gripped a heavy steel crowbar in her right hand and pulled Leo tight against her side with her left. The stairs creaked as heavy footsteps began climbing toward them. There was no back staircase. The second-floor windows were a 20-foot drop into a thorn patch below. They were completely trapped. But as the footsteps grew louder, Sarah's eyes darted toward the massive rotting oak desk bolted to the study floor. Nathaniel O'Connell had built a fortress to protect his legacy from violent men. He had built false walls, hidden compartments, and mechanical safes. The journal had said, "The main vault requires the iron key hidden where the heart of the home burns." But there was another line she had skimmed past in her rush. "A man cornered is a dead man. The builder knows the veins of his own house." Sarah grabbed a bundle of incriminating documents, stuffed them under the front of her shirt, and dragged Leo toward the massive oak desk. She did not know exactly what she was looking for, but she knew that her great-great-grandfather had not bolted a desk to the floor just for decoration. Heavy boots pounded against the top step of the landing. The beam of a powerful flashlight swept across the hallway, cutting through the dust in harsh, blinding strokes. Sarah dropped to the floor, pulling Leo down with her behind the solid bulk of the bolted oak desk. The builder knows the veins of his own house. Nathaniel O'Connell had built a fortress, not just a hiding place. If he had engineered a mechanical vault, he had engineered a way out. Sarah ran her hands frankly along the underside of the heavy oak desk, her fingers scraping against hardened gum splinters and decades of grime. "Check the bedrooms," the rough voice barked from the hallway. "Tear the mattresses apart. I want that journal." Sarah's fingers snagged on something cold and metallic, hidden deep inside the knee space of the desk, flush against the back panel. It felt like a heavy forged iron latch. She gripped it with both hands, her palms slick with sweat, and pulled downward with every ounce of strength she had left. A sharp mechanical click rang out from the wall, directly behind the desk. The tall, floor-to-ceiling bookshelf, which Sarah had assumed was simply built into the plaster, suddenly shifted, with a low, groaning sigh of ancient hinges. The entire middle section of the bookshelf swung inward by 2 inches, releasing a puff of cold, damp air. In here, a man yelled from the study doorway. The beam of his flashlight hit the ceiling. "Go, go, go," Sarah whispered fiercely into Leo's ear, shoving him into the narrow, pitch-black gap behind the bookshelf. She scrambled in right behind him, gripping the inner frame of the heavy wooden unit. Just as the intruder stepped fully into the study, Sarah pulled the bookshelf shut. It clicked into place with a terrifying finality, plunging her and Leo into absolute darkness. They were standing on a narrow, steeply pitched set of wooden stairs built directly into the hidden space between the study wall and the chimney. It was a secret passage, completely invisible from the outside footprint of the house. Through the thick wood and plaster, the sounds in the study were muffled but unmistakable. "Look at this," a man shouted. "The floor's been opened up. There's a vault. Empty it," the leader commanded. "Where's the woman?" "Windows are shut. No other doors. She must have jumped from another room." Sarah did not wait to hear anything more. She placed a steady hand on Leo's shoulder and guided him down the steep, suffocating staircase. The air was thick with the smell of dry rot and soot. They descended in complete darkness, flight after flight, passing the first floor and continuing downward into the earth itself. The stairs finally ended at a heavy iron-reinforced door. Sarah pushed it open, and they stumbled into the large, dirt-floored root cellar beneath the farmhouse. Moonlight filtered through a rusted iron grate at the far end of the basement. Sarah lifted Leo up, kicked the old latch free, and pushed the grate outward. They scrambled out into the overgrown thorns of the backyard, the cool night air hitting them like a wave. They did not stop running. Guided by moonlight, Sarah pulled Leo through the dense Pennsylvania woods, ignoring the thorns tearing at her clothes and the burning in her lungs. She did not stop until they reached the edge of County Route 9, 2 miles away from the O'Connell property. Trembling and covered in dirt, she flagged down a passing long-haul truck driver, who immediately locked his doors and called 911 when he saw her frantic state. Sarah knew that local law enforcement might be influenced by Thomas Harding's connections. When the state troopers arrived, she demanded to speak directly with the Pennsylvania State Police Criminal Investigation Unit. Sitting in a fluorescent-lit room at the police station as dawn broke outside, Sarah pulled the bundle of 1873 documents from inside her shirt and laid them on the metal table. She then hired one of the most aggressive litigation attorneys in Philadelphia, a man named Mitchell Brennan. Using one of the 1865 Liberty Head gold coins as payment, Brennan took one look at the historical papers, the forged bank records, and Elias Harding's signed letters of extortion, and immediately contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. By noon the following day, a tactical team raided the O'Connell farmhouse. They caught Thomas Harding and his hired men red-handed, attempting to load the last of the 1870 gold bricks into an armored transport van. The legal battle that followed was the biggest scandal in Willow Creek's history. The documents Sarah had unearthed proved beyond any doubt that the Harding family fortune had been built entirely on theft, fraud, and terror. Facing federal racketeering charges, attempted murder, and a massive civil lawsuit from the O'Connell estate, Thomas Harding's empire collapsed overnight. His assets were frozen, his reputation destroyed, and he was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Because the gold had been legally obtained and hidden by Nathaniel O'Connell on his own property, the state courts ruled it a lawful inheritance. The total value of the gold bricks and rare coins came to a staggering $14.2 million. 6 months later, the gravel driveway of the old farmhouse was freshly paved. The sagging porch had been meticulously rebuilt by skilled carpenters. The peeling gray paint had been replaced by a brilliant, historically accurate Victorian white. Sarah stood in the newly restored sitting room, the afternoon sun warming the rich mahogany of the fireplace mantel. The county taxes were paid in full. Bradley's marital debt had been wiped out with a single bank transfer. Leo was playing safe in the wide front yard, his laughter ringing out across the 40 acres of valley land that truly, finally, belonged to them. Sarah reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against a heavy, uneven iron key. Nathaniel O'Connell had buried a fortune to protect his family from the cruelties of his era. More than a century later, his great-great-granddaughter had used it to banish the darkness from hers entirely. Did Sarah's incredible discovery and narrow escape leave you breathless? History is full of hidden secrets waiting to be uncovered in the most unexpected places. If you love this story of mystery, survival, and ultimate justice, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that persistence pays off. Subscribe for more thrilling, heart-pounding stories of hidden treasures and unbelievable historical twists. See you in the next one.